And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Well, at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the original mothership at coalitionradio.us, where you will find about 7 years worth of interviews and questions and discussions and arguments. For those of you listening for the first time, or perhaps the first time in a long time, we've moved to our own facility. We're grateful to have spent time at other folks', if you will, digital or radio homes. But we've got our own facility, our own studio, high above the hills of La Prave, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. My name is Pat Ford. I am your host. And today, after spending quality time with Rhode Island's Governor Gina Raimondo in one of the great later bleeps of all time moments, walked off a stage into the sunset to be happily employed as Commerce Secretary for the President-elect Joe Biden, leaving behind her a state in despair, a state in wreckage, financially, physically, even to some degree, despite wonderful people in Rhode Island, and some would say spiritually. So I'm pretty angsty tonight. I'm pretty upset. I'm pretty pissed off. So I've got the perfect guests. Joining me for the very first time in way too long is someone I have a great deal of admiration for. She is, I believe, Rhode Island's preeminent Fourth Amendment attorney. She has advocated on behalf of the forgotten, the disenfranchised, the marginalized now, using her legal career, using her education really to spiritually set this state on fire. I got to know her years back when she was involved with DARE, Direct Action for Rights and Equality. She is now intimately involved in the operations of PRISM, and I'll let her talk about that, but I will just say this. There are a few people in this state who have a greater commitment to civil rights and civil liberties simultaneously than Attorney Shannah Kurland, and is willing to, in the hashtag of this show, clearly, as we say, hashtag take it personally. She takes it very personally. And after the events of today, the events of the past few weeks here in Rhode Island and the nation at large, after, well, quite frankly, the run-up to where we are right now over an entire generation, we need people who take it personally. Because clearly sitting on your ass, watching TV, waiting for Dancing with the Stars isn't quite cutting it. So I'm angry, and by coincidence, I have a feeling Attorney Kurland is, as they say, pretty tweaked. But I'm going to let her explain that. Joining her today is a client of hers, August Guang. They, them, Shannah Kurland, she, her. And they're going to tell their story, unedited, in raw form, I hope. Because the purpose of this show, as we move forward now past the election, is to fire people up. We are a state that is rudderless as of this afternoon. A sitting governor of a state in the United States of America in the year 2020 literally walked off the stage, refusing to answer any questions at a moment in time when we are facing an exigent health challenge that we haven't seen in our lifetime, while simultaneously facing the challenges of social justice in a manner that has continued to build up, despite claims to the contrary, to a point where it's untenable, at a time when our economy is collapsing around us. Shannah and August, welcome to the Coalition. Thanks for joining us, and it's great to have you on the air.
Thank you, Pat. Good to be here. Good to see you.
Thanks, Pat.
So, Shannah, why don't you kind of bring us up to date? Tell us what your involvement is with a variety of organizations in town. By the way, Shannah, in one, I think one of her stellar moments, is in fact the author of a tome that's available from the American Civil Liberties Union, one of my favorite organizations on the planet, that will tell you, and Shannah, you can give a little bit more detail on this, but should you be arrested as a part of a civil action, exactly how to behave. Now that's taking it personally. What are you involved in these days? What's going on? And what's on your mind, and what's bothering you the most right now?
Sure. And just to catch that, I'm probably not the best one to teach other people how to behave. I've been told I have some trouble in that area
Well,
going back many years. But, but it's a good book about sort of just how to sue the police or how to take a look at whether or not you can sue the police. But thank you. That's a really, that's a lot of accolades. And so now the goal will be to live up to them. But I think one of the sort of things, though, that makes me think is that there is actually so much amazing work that I've been able to be part of and taught by so many people about what, what this Constitution is supposed to mean, right? We've seen it just desecrated and turned into toilet paper last week. It's very obvious for a lot of folks. But I think for the communities that I have the opportunity to work with, the individuals that I get the opportunity to learn from and struggle side by side with, and coming right back to the organization that creates a space to make that happen, and a whole lot more, PRISM, Providence Youth Student Movement. So that does actually make me aware of how many people, and I feel incredibly blessed and fortunate to be able to actually spend this time tonight too with having the presence of one of the people who's been for a very long time, actually, well before they became my client, been one of those people to help me learn how this all works and how do we struggle and what do we struggle with, and how do we struggle with each other sometimes to get there. So all of that to say, when you were talking about Gina walking off the stage, leaving the state in such a financial and physical mess, it made me think also, and in emotional too. I think people are suffering. People are having a hard time with the quarantine, but with this sort of coming to terms with this incredible exposure of the violence that's always been a part of kind of keeping things how they are. And in particular, what I've been able to learn from people like the folks that built and are in PRISM and groups like DARE and other groups and individuals like August is that violence is really structured around race, first of all, right? So keep that sort of that racial hierarchy in place. And then because that lets the folks with the money keep the money and keeps people at the bottom. And how we and how policing is what really kind of maintains that all at a very fundamental and very scary physical and legal level. So given that, yes, it's been some crazy times. I think we have seen a lot with police response to the protests in Providence this summer and fall, with the state's response to, or lack of response, or just helping with that violence. And most recently, the Attorney General's response with denying the criminality of.
Oh, did we lose you there for a second? Hang on. I think we may have left Shannah for just a moment here. We'll get her back. Folks, if you're just joining us.
Age, huh?
God bless the internet. Folks, if you're just joining us, Shannah Kurland is if you've paid attention at all in the last few years, she is an attorney of some repute. That's a nice way of saying she makes people uncomfortable. And she makes people uncomfortable by her advocacy, by her intensity, and again, as we like to emphasize, by her willing to take it personally. Maybe we can message Shannah just to try and log in again. Also joining us is August Guang, and we'll get into August's story in just a second as soon as we can get Shannah back on. If I can just sort of prattle on for a second here. We've seen now that corporate media is unwilling to talk about what I call third rail issues, the things that make people profoundly uncomfortable. Race is one of them. Being marginalized economically is another one. A friend of mine likes to use the term economic racism. That's another one. The criminal justice system. Do we have Shannah back? Excellent. Can you hear us okay now? Are you back?
Oh, I'm sorry about that. My apologies.
No. Listen, I'm hoping that in a few months that we're going to be able to have people in person here in our studio, high above the hills in the bunker, if you will, in Providence. That's the goal here. But until things calm down a little bit with the disease, we're going to have to kind of all get along in terms of the technology. The technology is the fact that we could do this when a year and a half or 2 years ago this would have been unimaginable is astonishing. So go ahead. You were talking about some of the groups that you're working with, and they inspire you, and you're about to go into some of the projects, and we're going to talk about August's situation as well.
Right. Well, actually, that's what, in fact, I was about 20 seconds away from and finishing talking and when I lost contact. But one of the things that I think sort of when people look at what happened in DC last week is this sort of watershed moment. It's something that has always existed, what it's revealed about the power of white supremacy. And one example is a story that, we want to share about what happened to August and what the police are doing. And unfortunately, the mainstream media is very complicit to just kind of use this violence, that white power riot in DC, to criminalize the people who have been working so hard for so long for the opposite, right? So, for instance, they, they printed, the DC Metro Police put together a spreadsheet of all of the unrest-related arrests going back to May. And, conveniently May being the starting point, because that's when the unrest around the murder of George Floyd started, echoing in the national level. And so they put this front and center on their website. So anyone that's trying to find out if anyone from Rhode Island got arrested and checks that website, they click in, and it's very easy to make the mistake, as some media did, and target people who have been involved in other peaceful, actual good protests in DC,
right,
who may have been arrested by DC police.
It's astonishing to me the sheer ignorance that the mainstream big corporate national media has with regard to the actual events that take place literally under their nose. I mean, the sheer concentration of media assets and money and infrastructure in D.C. to cover the poobahs, if you will, seems to be, I can't understand where they're coming from. These are the stories of our generation. And the culpability they share in perpetuating this marginalization because of either their laziness or their ignorance is baffling to me. There was a song by Bruce Springsteen years ago, something about 150 stations or whatever it was and nothing on. There is so much discussed. There is so much to talk about. Why do you think it's laziness? Do you think it's boredom? Do you think it's just learned ignorance? What's going through their mind, in your thoughts?
I want to ask August to jump in, because we were having an interesting conversation earlier about how, just it's almost like a rebound effect, because I'm trying to it's the media's fault. Well, here's what the police did. And we're sort of looking at, and it's really about that interaction back and forth between them is scary. And I don't know, did you have any thoughts on that? Because it's just really, to me, it's so at the core of stuff.
Yeah, I think cops they've been actually shown on video, right? Letting folks in at the attempted coup and not making any arrests. Cops are basically the same as these white supremacists, right? And they routinely target Black and brown folks. And it's they can actually, it wasn't just that it was on their website. They actually put out info and tweets on oh, these are the folks we arrested at the attempted coup. Here's the list. And the list is May to January or whatever. But it's if you're oh, here's the list. And unless you're interested in doing that fact checking, which people should always be, but you're going to see, oh, wow, look at all these other people do that search for Rhode Island. And it's like, cops can release this like massive info dump when it suits them, but like can't release seemingly anything when it matters for like the justice of other people, like the case with Jamal Gonsalves. And then there's like the media piece, right? With the mainstream media, they just take this info, they don't actually check anything, and then they just repost it, which like in general means that, right, they pretty much still like believe and work with cops, like they believe what cops tell them.
At what point do you believe is it possible for what I euphemistically, somewhat sarcastically call the police winning streak, where I think we're up to 3,000 cases of either assault, murders, outright executions, where they've been absolved of any responsibility? Does the George Floyd situation and the recent decision to try that one police officer, the individual whose literally knees were on George Floyd's neck, is that the final breaking point, or is just going to be more of the same?
It's not sort of there. I don't see starting points. Hopefully we will one day see an end point. But if we remember how policing started in the US, right? This was the slave patrols. That's what it grew out of. That's why some of you see those differences between policing in England, for instance, and in the US, because it was literally groups of, like these white men who would go around and try to catch people who had escaped slavery so they could be returned to slavery or tortured or killed. So no matter how much, there can be some very nice people that say, oh, I want to do this job, and think even some of them for good motives. But the reality is that institution is not built to achieve justice. It's built to exert control. So I think anything that we see is sort of typical and expected. A lot of people have, many for the first time, I think, during the protests, seen the outrageous, and I'm looking at just Providence, inside Providence, the borders of Providence, no matter which police decide to get themselves involved. The level of violence they use, the lies they put in their reports, the sort of power hungry use of intentional escalation, starting fights, picking fights where there are none, inserting violence. Those are the same tactics they use every single day in our neighborhoods, right? It's just they sort of put them on show, they have more gear, and there's more of them gathered in one place when folks come together and protest and support and say, stop killing Black people. So it's just so built in.
And I'd like to ask August and you this question as well. As someone who's been at virtually every protest, and in fact, I think the last couple of times I saw you, Shannah, were at one of the protests right downtown by the State House. Everyone remembers the massive outpouring on behalf of Black Lives Matter. Fewer were at a handful of protests organized right afterwards by organizations like ProvX and attended by a variety of groups, PRISM, DARE, and the incredible militaristic police presence on the State House steps, despite the fact that it was largely high school, and I don't say this to be negative, but if you're my age, children. Mature children who've seen a lot in their lives, children who are exercising their First Amendment and their political rights. So maybe that doesn't qualify them as children anymore, because they're, quite frankly, in a lot of ways, they've acted more as adults than some of the establishment adults who, quite frankly, have acted like children. But what does that speak to the variety of communities in the west and the south end of Providence? Just using geography as to put something into context. When you see that kind of militaristic presence, and you see the complete breakdown and absence, if you will, of any sort of overwhelming force in Washington, D.C., despite the fact that it's been acknowledged across media and across government that everybody should have seen this coming.
Well, there's, if, when you try to kind of deal with trauma, use humor to help, there's all the like, it's like going to a Miley concert and asking where Hannah is. I mean, the police are part of that very much so. And we know, it's pretty obvious in so many concrete ways, part of that, mob of thugs, of, white power fascist thugs that stormed it. So it sort of, it fits. It's all part. And then, so there's, who's on which side are you on, I guess, is kind of one way to say it and break it down pretty simply. So I don't think any of it, I mean, there's no surprise anywhere. It's just it's so tragic that it takes that much for a lot of us white folks to see it and understand it, and begin to understand it, I should say.
August, what are your thoughts? As someone who is very political, as someone who lives in Rhode Island, as a young person, is very political. What does it speak to you generationally when you run everything from the jump out boys to the police, the militaristic police presence, to what happens in DC? What does it say to you as someone who's young and political and growing up in America?
Well, I'm not that young, but I just
to me, young. You're young.
But what does it say to me? I don't know. I think the entire country of America is built on a foundation of genocide and lies, honestly. So, I mean, I don't really know what it says. It's just like same shit, different day.
Yeah.
Compare, if you will, the police presence and the police involvement in day-to-day life in different parts of the city from your experience. Are they, is it a question of being hyper-involved or hyper-present on the South and West End as opposed to the Tony East Side?
Sorry, you're asking about police presence?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's way more cops on the South Side and the West End.
Are they still, despite the fact that if you look at the law enforcement journals and you talk to big law enforcement and you talk to progressive, I should say not progressive, but democratic cities where they quote unquote have put an end to things like stop and frisk, are the same attitudes still in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a thing of they can modernize all they want, right? Like it used to be a big deal. I remember in the 90s, I think there's even community groups. We were interested in this idea of police departments getting accredited by CALEA, which I can never remember, CALEA, and it stands for some letter, the letters. It's an acronym, but it's the gold standard of policing. And all it means basically is you pay these consultants a certain amount of money. They write down some pretty policies. You adopt them and you pretend you follow them. Unless you find out that they're actually illegal, and then you fix them or adjust them or whatever. I mean, it's not, it's not, there's things that they change sort of the names for things that they call them. There's no gang unit anymore. Now it's the Violent Crimes Task Force, but it's the same dudes out there and they're thug boots and whatever, trying to, look tough because they get better gear. I mean, they're playing games in many ways, but it's with people's lives and safety. I mean, part of what, we have to think about is not just, they don't really kill people in Providence and Rhode Island. Oh, not that much. It's not as, and it's every day they're slicing off a part of somebody's soul and many people's souls by what they do to folks in terms of the emotional impact. I mean, even just this, I mean, there's on the front end, just, terrifying somebody that they might die, to be black and stopped by police. I'm not qualified to talk about that, but I mean, I think that's a good something for folks on your show to listen to and learn about, Pat. But I mean, on the legal end, that they have arrested you. I was talking with a client tonight about this feeling of like, wait, you're kidding, right? But I didn't do anything wrong, but I didn't break the law. What do you mean you're arresting me in this like idea? And that you can sometimes have, like, on the one hand, yes, it happens, and unfortunately folks get used to it, but what it means, the pain from it, like I'm thinking about just like, again, just I'm sorry I keep throwing it back at you, August, but sort of what it does to like a person to like have that, I mean, in any situation, right? Even when I didn't do anything wrong, and that's going to come out pretty quickly and easily. Or the idea of like, oh, guess what? Like this idea, something that's completely so insane, like, oh, you stormed the Capitol on Wednesday, and you were part of that, and like the fear that must strike. I mean, it's easy to look now and say, oh, that's absurd. Oh, good thing. Okay, they fixed that pretty quick. But I can't imagine. I don't care if it's 30 minutes or 6 hours or however long, to like, I can't imagine just to have that panic in your heart that people are saying this about you. And, and I understand, I guess it sounds like outside Providence, there's even the same thing happened to other people in other places, other communities, with some harsh ramifications, even beyond just the emotional hit on it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like, no, I just feel like, it's like you get arrested, and it's like, right, it's supposed to be like innocent until proven guilty or whatever, but it's like the minute you get arrested, you get considered guilty already by like the public or whatever. And so it's like, for folks who, especially like Black folks who are like getting targeted and like arrested in like often really violent ways for essentially doing nothing, just trying to live their lives. That's super fucked up. And then it's like, and then for me, it was like, I don't know I think we haven't, but it was like, my name got put out there and on like news stations as like someone who got arrested at the attempted coup on Wednesday. And so then it was like all of a sudden, like all of these people were like, the news articles were getting posted. I was getting messages like people were sort of like looking for me on social media. I actually got doxxed, and I was like, what the fuck? Like that's one, like completely not true, and then like two, like, I was like seriously freaked out for my own safety. Right.
Because the minute your name is thrown into that quote unquote court of public opinion, then you've got folks who read the first 2 lines of a Facebook post, never take the time to actually, consider the circumstances, consider the source, consider whether or not it's real, and then base a reaction on that can impact someone's circle of friends, that can impact their employment, their education, their housing status. There are all sorts of things that the establishment can bring down on you, like holy hell. Has there been any acknowledgement or retraction or apologies or oops, we kind of screwed up here or anything like that whatsoever?
There was an ABC did post a article saying like a correction, saying that like none of the 3 people named as arrested and from Rhode Island were actually there, but there's been no public apology to me or anything.
Yeah, and yet Go ahead, buddy.
I was going to add, there's a gentleman in Boston that it happened to too, right? Got some really serious.
This guy named Justin, who's a 2L, like a law student at New England Law, and a co-founder of a Black liberation organization called DC Protests. His name got published in, I forget, it's some Massachusetts like pub news station, similar to what happened here, about like as like a Massachusetts man who was arrested during the Capitol siege, the violent Capitol siege or whatever. And folks actually, that article was up for much longer than the ones in Rhode Island were. And folks actually took screenshots of it and sent it to his law school. And now he's facing repercussions there. And like this dude just like, he wasn't there. He just wants to stay in law school. Like he shouldn't be penalized for this like completely false information.
Right. And don't we want, I'm sorry, go ahead, Shannah.
Well, I was just going to, just riffing off of that. When when you get arrested, they give your mugshot out, to whoever wants it, including the like bottom of the bottom feeders of the so-called media world.
Mhm.
And you know who I mean, but they put just to be charged with a crime, your name is published in the system, your date of birth, your address. I mean, you are out there exposed like somebody accused of a crime. And and that's insane. That's just, yeah, it's part of what August was saying about you are guilty as soon as they say you're guilty. And it's
Right.
your burden then to prove that you're not.
Right. And again, you become a target of so many things, so many misrepresentations. And here's the real challenge. I mean, I would hope attorneys would be politically active. I want attorneys to go out there and advocate on behalf of civil liberties and folks who are finding a police state / quote unquote, I'll use air quotes here, coalition, air quotes, criminal justice system. We which brings to mind, of course, the ultimate question. You've got folks who claim to be forward thinking, I'll use that term, who still think that we can reimagine, that's the new word, I guess, for this month. We can reimagine the criminal justice system. Based on both of your experiences and what you've seen, what you protested for, what you've experienced personally, particularly Shannah, being on sort of the front line, is it possible to quote unquote reimagine our criminal justice system, or does it need to be trashed completely and started from scratch?
Oh no, I mean, I was going to say
crash it.
Yeah. I mean, the word abolish is actually, it's a very beautiful vision as long as we challenge ourselves to think it thoroughly through. Because here's the thing, the system that exists now, it cannot stay. It cannot remain. It is killing too many people. It is destroying people, killing people physically, spiritually, in so many ways. It's committing genocide against Black people. It is harming many other people in many ways. So this system has to go. There's no option. The part that I think often, and I'm going to blame myself as one of the big ones around this, that we leave out is what do we do instead to learn to not harm each other, right? To what do we do to, as a society, try, prevent and reduce harm, because we're human beings. I mean, we're just going to be assholes sometimes, right? And things are going to happen. And so how do we develop alternatives? And that is we don't know how to do that. Society hasn't taught us. So that's a heavy lift, but we have to engage with that.
Well, I would imagine, and of course I want both of your reactions because you are so forward facing on this issue. You are so involved. I would imagine it would begin with the elimination of this hierarchical top down military style structure for quote unquote criminal justice. I believe personally that those two sets of terms are incompatible with each other. And we've only amped it up with the adoption, if you will. And I guess this term is battle rattle. And, when you show up, I call them mutant Ninja Turtles. I was at one of the confrontations, if you will, right behind the public safety complex, and you have to be of a certain generation to understand that George Kurland would have a field day with the notion of the Providence Public Safety Complex. That's a whole nother conversation. Wow, talk about abuse of the English language. Where the Mutant Ninja Turtles, given the opportunity to come out and present that show of force, in my case, to a nearly 60-year-old guy, I mean, I can laugh because I'll go home to the suburbs, and they're not going to give me that much of a hard time. But we saw how they grabbed people and they essentially provoked a situation which escalated to arrests and, in a couple of cases, physical beatings. Can we? Is that a system capable of reform? I'm not sure it is. What do you think?
It's got to be abolished.
Yeah. I don't see how you fix it. And I mean, I even like that night, if you're talking about that big night with where the police chased people down Westminster, I remember, I went to a little old folk section around the back, like, okay, we're going to stand here and watch the back end with another friend even older than me, a comrade, John Prince. And we ended up talking for a while with a young officer who was in the same class as some of that awful, terrible class of 2014 with, cops like Matthew Sheridan, Michael Place, Kyle Andrus, some of the real, some of the worst ones. And, talking with this young man, he got excited talking about being in the schools, helping students with their college applications. And I'm like, wow, imagine if you could get the same salary and benefits you get now to spend all day in those schools with those kids without a gun, without, this idea of putting them in jail if things get to a certain, that's in something you might be doing someday to that same kid or another. I mean, so the idea, it's not about like, oh, those poor officers, some of them are trying. No, the idea is like, let's not have a system that's built on arresting people and to make it happen the way they want, that's based on brutalizing people and just this constant like just chest bumping but as a path towards just knocking somebody down and wiping out a people, right? Wiping out Black people as best they can.
Well, I mean, and two things come to mind. The situation with Michael Clark, the police recruit who was literally shunned and humiliated and quite frankly, physically beaten, allegedly. We have to use the word allegedly, right, attorney? Out of the police academy. And then what I guess I would love to engage in a project with a few folks you talk about the class of 2014. And the problem is that most folks in Rhode Island have no idea who some of these officers are. And again, I will not claim to be an expert in, if you will, managing police abuse. But it strikes me that whether it's the Policeman's Bill of Rights and or a complicit media and or a complicit criminal justice system in Rhode Island is that you constantly get, and this must go right up your ass. Sorry for that, but you constantly get the one bad apple, don't fill in the blanks. I can't even say the whole thing. When in fact, there is a legion of individual police officers who have been pulled up on charges in some cases, but generally recognized to be assholes. Just of the purest form. And somehow the fact that they're not either in prison or in some cases still allowed to wear a badge is amazing. How is it that we don't know as individuals who are not as intimately involved as you folks are about some of these cases?
The media doesn't report on them.
Yeah. And I think there's sometimes folks get rightfully worried about repercussions. There's this when they're putting criminal charges over your head, which is what they do, arrest their way out of a lawsuit. You are in danger. Anytime you open your mouth, you're in danger. I'm amazed at the courage that folks have, in terms of speaking out, about, the things that happened to them where they ended up under arrest and facing charges. I mean, I have to say, I'm not brave enough. I'm too scared of my lawyer to talk about my stuff because I don't want Allison to have to yell at me. But for real, that's a very hard and dangerous thing to do. And even if it's not about the criminal situation, I mean, there have been cases of retribution. I mean, there's a woman I respect enormously when she was, and I don't know if she wants her name out, but this is some years back when she was fighting for her son who had been viciously beaten by police. And, she finds a 9mm bullet in her doorway, in her door jamb when she wasn't home. I mean, there's real danger. They decide you're a troublemaker. They mess with you easily. So I think, they have created, a fear that, is based on a reality.
Mm-hmm. Two situations that I need an education on and updating on. First of all, what is the status and the controversy that surrounds the Providence External Review Authority?
Ooh. I'll jump in on that one. I mean, I think it's sort of everything we heard, and I bet you want to jump into everything we heard coming out of the police leadership's mouths. I mean, I have to say, out of all the things I'll criticize them for, I do appreciate that Colonel Clements has generally been pretty honest about his, level of respect for the CSA and para. There's no hiding it. Somewhat similar for Commissioner Perry. The mayor, on the other hand, says things, but we haven't seen the actions to follow them up. But I think what happened, though, is there was a determination that we're not gonna let para succeed, because if para works, it really is the way the ordinance is written, the level of hope for it and definitely need for it is so intense that I think they really do honestly see, and especially with the extra tools that the CSA, Community Safety Act, brought for para to be able to use, they're scared of it. They really do not want it to succeed. And they did their best. To stop it from working by refusing to cooperate. No, I don't like your game. I'm going home. It's like everybody decides we're going to play kickball, but you wanted to play, dodgeball, because you like to throw the balls hard at people and try to hurt them, right? Everybody else wants to play kickball. So you say, no, I'm going home. And then you take the ball with you. That's what they're doing when they refuse to follow the law and share the data, the information that they're required to. So, you have a group of, I think, mostly very dedicated volunteers who, I think are all there because they want to do something that they believe is right. And there's different ideas among them on what that is. But it's hard to work together as a group of humans who are, doing this when everybody's trying to make you fail, when you have an enormous task and a lot of eyes on you. So I think as part of the police messing with para, the organization went through the internal conflict around how do we deal with the fact that they are, that the police are refusing to cooperate. So an example is para didn't have independent counsel, and instead the city solicitors are sitting there in the meetings, giving them advice about the para video or the Hanley videos, right? And whether or not they had to go to the city solicitor's office or not to respond to an APRA request. There's absolutely and finally they admitted it. There's no legal requirement for them to do that. But you have the city, an assistant city solicitor acting as a spokesperson. The next day she's in court prosecuting people arrested at police protests that para is trying to investigate. Right. So if that's not conflict of interest, I'm sorry, what is? So para was getting bad advice, and I think it was hard for them to recognize that. So the whole situation with the video got messed up back then. So if they voted not to release it, they didn't get the opportunity to really actually hear, no, legally, that's not the sound argument. The Supreme Court Ethics Advisory Panel ended up, saying, yeah, there's no reason a lawyer has to tell the police not to release it. I mean, think about it. Just think about it. That video. Oh, you can't release it because it's evidence in a trial. Oh, I'm sorry. How often do you have news crews, cameras inside a conference room where you lay out the stacks of cocaine on the table, the piles of cash, the guns and the bullets? Okay, that's evidence, physical evidence. And you're letting people in the same room with them. What? You're going to stream the video and somebody's going to alter it? So it was ridiculous at the first point, but so, yeah, that's my take on sort of what happened. I think, that was a hard situation for Jose to navigate. And in the end, he said, okay, I have to do the right thing. I know it's going to be difficult, and I think, that's my take on it.
Another classic case of misinformation.
Because the implication, again, and I'm trying to look at this through this perspective as I'll call it the typical Rhode Islander who's 1, 2, 3 steps removed from this, gets a 5-minute oversight of it on Channel 10 or Channel 12. And I'm not trying to indict them, but just gets the typical 3-minute news treatment. And all you see is you don't see the video of Joseph Hanley and I'm quoting, grinding his knee into a handcuffed man's head on the pavement, kicking him and stepping on his legs during an arrest, all right, for a misdemeanor. You don't see that. all you get is a snippet of Mr. Batista being accused of things, not real specific things, but being accused of things. So you if you're the typical 5 steps removed individual in Rhode Island who at this point is trying to survive a pandemic, trying to find a way to keep their family fed and just not collapse from just sheer nervous exhaustion, your takeaway is that this gentleman, Mr. Batista, acted improperly. And I guess that's my theme, because there's no effing follow-up. There's no one dives into and gives a primer on 101, on Peril 101, why it's there, what the history is. I think most people, and I'm just giving my listeners a background, most people would be astonished to understand that this organization, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was founded in the wake of the Cornell Young shooting. How many years ago was the Cornell Young shooting?
January, January 20th, 2000. I believe the 20th.
Right, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary. 21st anniversary, excuse me. And yet we are still under siege. Certain communities in this city, in this state, are under siege by a police department that in some arguments has actually gotten worse. Then now, let's since we're covering all the angles here, I need both of you to educate me, because I trust your judgment on the Jamal, and forgive me, I'm terrible with pronunciations, but the Jamal Gonzalez situation with the crash and the severe injury, if you will, to a young man who was on some form of all-terrain vehicle. What we get so many mixed signals from that, from a law enforcement community that, quite frankly, should not be generating mixed signals. Whatever happened to just the facts, ma'am, just the facts? Please educate me on that.
Well, I mean, I've got a few things to say, but I think, at some point, if there's any of his family and friends that wanted to talk, have them on. I know they have been doing press conferences here and there, and his dad and his mom have talked some. And then, just the biker issue in general, Jeremy Costa's great, and other bikers that have been doing it. But I think that the thing to remember is this is just like a whole hatred by police of a culture where young people, and in Providence has been primarily young people of color riding, represent like something the police want to squash, like it's sort of whether it's a symbolic liberty or whatever, like, we're doing this instead of one of those things you tell us we're not supposed to be doing, but we're having fun still. I mean, honestly, living like, 2 blocks from Broad Street, you get to the corner on a nice summer day and there's a group of riders, and like, it's like, you get to watch stunts. It's fun. Okay. You miss a light, but you miss a light for stupid reasons all the time. So at least it's something, it's some fun. It's like some excitement in the neighborhood. But what kills me though, and I talk about this with my kids, you always know the light changes, you're ready to go, and pop, there's that one rider, there's a straggler or two, right? And that's coming, and you stop in time, and everybody's like, oh, so it's about like, oh, safety. I might be annoyed or cussing that they cost me an extra light. Okay, fine, but oh my gosh, that's somebody's kid. Let me be safe. And you might even watch where you're going. That's fine, but you're not trying to run them down. And I don't understand how Peter Nerona, I don't know what the hell this man thinks he's running. What office? Is it just he's going to run for AG again and then wants a big corporate job? I don't know what his plan is. But to think that he can stand there and honestly say that Kyle Andrus on the fucking radio saying, box him in, is not relevant because nobody boxed him in. I don't have a certificate in tactical driving, but you watch from the moment you first ever saw the video. This car is coming out the street, and here's this other car, and that's exactly what they're doing. So what if they don't recall? hearing him say it. So what if that other car was already moving because they were thinking the same goddamn way, because that's what their practice is. That's what they do. To them, this is like they're playing a fucking video game with our kids' lives, with our, it's disgusting. They would not go to a suburb and do that and play a video game with people's lives. I'm just sickened by it. And to say that Peter Nerona says that that's not reckless driving, I'm sorry, then every kid that you have charged with reckless driving simply for having an ATV on a street that half the time nobody even knew was illegal because the people who sold it to them said it was. So somebody lost a lot of money, and then you're going to go and destroy it just to be spiteful and petty on top of being racist and murderous? No. I think it's really clear what they did to Jamal as part of their thinking and part of this culture they have.
And isn't that really, I guess, one of the takeaways? It has become, this type of behavior has become so overt in law enforcement around the country that the notion that it's singular, the notion that it's an aberrant behavior has been completely lost. It's just the things cops do. And it's okay because that's what cops do. Now, let's call out another event in recent Rhode Island history. It was a year or two ago. I can't say the date, but of course I'm talking about that assassination on the overpass next to the Providence Place Mall. And so is PARA or any organization, is there anything... I mean, Providence chase tactics. I mean, as a society, supposedly we've come to the place where chases are broken off if, in fact, there's an exigent danger to the community. That's the thought. That's what they tell us on Law and Order on TV. Are you telling me that's not true? How does this crap happen?
I mean, they do what they want. They're having fun. Like, they get caught. Maybe they get, oops, whoops, that looked bad. Here, we're going to yell at you. You were too bold about it. But I mean, there's not, they can have, like I said, this whole thing with Kalia, they have some very nice written policies, that, seem like that but then, they'll sneak ways around them because that's what they're trying to do. I did actually, though, just wanted to point out one thing I forgot to mention. When you, since we were talking about Jamal Gonzalez, the family has put up finally a GoFundMe page because there is the rehab hospital that he's been staying at. The bills are enormous. He's going to come back to, his father was speaking at the press conference last week, come back to their apartment, and has to be renovated, widen the doors for the wheelchair. I mean, my understanding is he's not mobile at all. Like, I don't think he has much physical mobility at all, from what they were saying. And there's going to be a GoFundMe page. I don't have the link, but maybe right in front of me, but maybe we could get that and share that with maybe your audience would want to. Yeah, we're actually
looking. Mickey, our super producer, is actually looking that up right now, and if we can't get it in time to get in as part of the video, we'll certainly add it to the share when we post this video around. August, let me ask you, what is your activism, and tell us about that, and what are your, as an activist, what are your priorities right now moving forward? What is there a single issue that really preoccupies you and motivates you to get involved with the community?
I mean, most of my work is on racial and queer justice. That's pretty much how I came into this work, as a trans Asian person. Mm-hmm. I worked on the Community Safety Act, actually, right. To get it passed. I think these days, I mean, I would identify as a police and prison abolitionist, and that's sort of what a lot of my work revolves around. Mm-hmm. These days, I think I'm more interested. I feel pulled towards something Shannah said earlier, which is like, how do we build systems that are outside of the police, like in prisons? Like, what do we do after abolition? Like, how can we care for each other? And hold each other accountable. So right now I'm actually working with a collective called Tooth and Nail, sort of on building out sustainable food and food for like mutual aid systems.
That's interesting because we've regressed to a point now, and again, I'm of a certain age, so I get a sort of a sad kick, if you will, out of some of the words that are issued by government. They use the word food insecurity. A significant portion of Rhode Islanders right now are facing food insecurity. I wish they would come out and say it is what it is, which is malnutrition. But malnutrition is decidedly unsexy, and it's decidedly a bad optic if, in fact, your career path is, involves trying to get to Washington, D.C. and get the hell out of town as fast as you can. So we use the term food insecurity. And a nation that's supposed to be amongst the richest in the world, the notion that people are hungry in Providence, Rhode Island in the year 2021 is, an obscenity to say the least. So good for you. And I hope you'll take an opportunity to share some of that work with us in the future. Because that's what we're trying to do here is amplify community efforts to people who, quite frankly, might not see it. Our listeners and viewers are a little different than folks who might be following Uprise Rhode Island or some of the other great independent media outlets. We're trying to reach out, and to a large degree, to the burbs, to folks who are, who might not come into these in contact with these issues is day to day. Now, Shannah, what are your priorities going forward? If we can kind of wrap it up, and I want you both to engage in what we call here lovingly shameless self-promotion, because I want, as a part of this permanent record, because this video is in a sense a permanent record, to have folks be able to go out and explore websites and reach out to different community organizations that they might not have come in contact. But Shannah, what are you working on going forward? What are your priorities?
All right. So this is the part where if I just written a book, I'd hold it up and say, here, I just finished this, go buy it. I wish I could answer that question with a really clear answer. I remember a few New Year's days back hanging out with some friends, maybe 3-4 years ago on New Year's Day, and like looking forward to 2020 and all the 2020 clear vision. And we're going to start planning now. And this idea that by 2020, we'd be like knowing what we're going to do to change the world and make it better. And well, obviously, so that didn't happen. And so I think what it is we have to be ready to look at everything in a completely different way. I'm excited, actually. I'm 53, and depending on sort of what I think Wendy's, I can get the soda for free. Maybe is the only discount. But what it makes me think about is like with being an elder. I mean, I've been really spoiled and overprivileged in the last 6 years to be working at Prism and get the chance to start learning from young people, right, who have so much to teach, and particularly young Black, brown people who are struggling to make it, and realizing, oh, wow, if I just shut up and listen to them, I could actually learn. Still working on the shut up and listen part, but I know why I want to. And that's made me a better mother too, to my own kids, my own 3 beautiful children who I love. But I think, so what I want to be able to do is figure out ways to how do we blend, because I don't want to then ignore the wisdom that my elders have shared, the things I've learned from mistakes I've made. And, my Aveja's my own age, my comrades, my age group, and all throughout. So what I'm really excited about is learning ways, how do you sort of put together some of the pieces of, the power and passion of the protests that the youth have organized, some of the tactical fails and successes that my generation's had over the years, and, putting all of that together to, just move things forward, because there's just really no choice.
There really isn't anymore, is there? It's not even a question of political affiliation. It's just really a question of whether people are human beings. I don't know what our immediate future holds in this country. If maybe this wake up call for all this lunacy inspired by Bad Man Orange is going to shock people now. The events of last week, will they shock people into a recognition that in some cases you want to support the thin blue line, but those are the ones who are coming from you the minute you engage in any sort of revolt, right or wrong. The moment whether or not you want to be a follower of a Washington establishment that is completely out of touch with the needs of ordinary folks. We allegedly elected this guy because he wasn't going to be Bad Man Orange, but here's a guy who's got an uninterrupted record of promoting the war on drugs and engaging in immigration policies that are horrific, and is not a supporter of immigration justice and is already walking it back. So I guess the question maybe I'll let it hang, but feel free to answer it if you want. What are the limits anymore? Clearly, government is not going to do the right thing because it's the right thing. So where do we go from here? Shannah, you and I and August, we've just met, if you will, digitally. But in a sense, we represent, like I said at the onset of the show, we want to achieve certain goals. We just come from it at different places and different techniques. Is it time for revolt? Is it time for, just outrageous levels of civil disobedience? I'm convinced we're in for 4 more years of the same. I don't see this president, and particularly not this vice president, all of a sudden having a deathbed conversion to, promoting civil liberties. What do we do? What's your parting advice? And again, feel free to both of you to impart this to us, but also to let us know where folks can find you on the web.
Yeah, I mean, I think large scale civil disobedience is needed. I think there pretty much needs to be large scale revolt. Maybe this probably won't sound great, but it's not, overthrowing the U.S. government. I wouldn't do it with those folks, but I think honestly, I think we've been talking about it, but there's just, a lot of systems need to be abolished. And I also think that beyond that too, since we all know the government isn't really going to do anything for us, it's part of why I started feeling compelled towards sort of building these alternative systems, because we're the ones who are going to save ourselves, right? That's why we're trying to grow food for ourselves, because the government's not going to address food insecurity. I think the whole concept of mutual aid is not charity, right? It's providing resources so that you yourself can to others, so that you yourself can also receive resources and survive.
Consenting adults coming together to work on behalf of each other's mutual interests, while at the same time agreeing to engage in no harm or no force or use of coercion to others. That's that. By the way, that's Shannah. I know I have to tease you at least once about this. That is a very libertarian perspective.
Yeah, I picked that up and I was like, oh, it's a little bit anarchist. Okay, kind of sort of. That's for another show, another fun discussion. And I like talking about mutual aid. Then thinking about that, it's not an either or, and it's taken me so long to realize this. I was so didactic when I used to be more didactic, but it's if you build together the mutual assistance and building power. I could imagine, just parts of my neighborhood, for instance, we could just take control of our neighborhood in ways that are very, there's already a couple corners where I think the police understand they're not welcome and they should, avoid. Uncomfortable, unpleasant. They should avoid being there when they, but if you combine that with and somebody's growing food here, and actually a friend of mine, Gladys Gould, does that beautifully, right? Here, I'm going to stick some of these extra raspberries in your, across the street in the neighbor's yard. Is that okay? Okay. And to ways to try to do, to put those things together, right? And control over, that condo project is not going to go into a historic Black church on Adelaide Avenue. That's disgusting. That's not what it's for. It should be community space, and then fix up those 5 houses for affordable housing, and for community actually to decide those things would be beautiful.
Now that's outstanding. And in the same measure, if I can close on this, to redefine how we engage in some level of shared law enforcement that is community-based and that's bottom up from the community, as opposed to, again, this sort of militaristic, top-down, authoritarian regimes which have been created largely for profit and then expanded upon largely for profit. So I think that's a great way to close the show for tonight. Listen, to both of you, August, it was great to meet you. I hope we get a chance to meet.
Good to meet you.
In the real world, whenever that real world comes back at some point. Shannah, you're an inspiration to me. I love you. Your commitment is total. You joked about all of us getting a little older. Well, it's a life worth lived if you in fact can engage in this type of fundamental change in a time and a moment in history when it's so necessary. So congratulations on all your efforts, and please continue to take it personally. I admire that. Real quick, where can folks find you on the web?
Prism.us, us, and that stands for us, not United States. Prism.us.
Okay. And August, is there any particular place, or do you want to just forward the Prism reference as well?
Oh, I don't work with Prism right now. I shut down all of my web presence.
You're off the grid?
But you can. Well,
contact me.
Having my information put out there was pretty scary. But if you want to get in touch, you can get in touch with me. You can get in touch through Shannah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, again, thanks for joining us. We're going to sign off tonight, but I hope folks, when they see this and listen to this, I hope they give it more than the cursory glance that seems to be the bane of social media today. Because ultimately what we're describing is not a left-right, not a blue-red, purple, gold continuum. What we're talking about is people relearning how to engage in positive self-association, in working projects with individuals, respecting individuals' rights, respecting communities' rights, and not feeling like you have to be tied to this massive, if you will, for lack of a better word, this massive culture of government. You just don't have to be. And we're seeing firsthand the ills that befall us, whether it be today in Providence, whether it be writ large on a national level with what's happening in our inner cities, with what's happening to, if you will, First and Fourth Amendment issues everywhere. So we're going to sign off tonight. This will be all over social media tomorrow. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, the mothership at coalitionradio.us, where 7 or 8 years of interviews with all sorts of folks are out there for just some reference. We'll be back on tomorrow night stirring it up. As we like to say, please take it personally.